More than anything, Alan Wake 2 is a game of moments. And with that being said, this is your one and only spoiler warning for the video. I won't discuss the ending or anything too crucial, but I'm going to freely discuss this game over the course of this video. Consider yourself warned. Whether it be the more overt "we sing" sequence, a musical number all of a sudden in the middle of a psychological horror game, which almost needs no introduction at this point, with it being immortalized at last year's Game Awards, the return of a certain hard-boiled detective in Everything But Name, or the first time that you actually get to understand the implications that Thomas Zane's Angel Lamp has on gameplay. This game is loaded with so many details, so much world building, and nods to everything that Remedy has been up to in the last 13 years since we were left with this cryptic ending.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
And somehow this game simultaneously sets up the next phase of Remedy's dive into their connected universe while expertly crafting a narrative and gameplay experience that makes the 13-year wait for this title feel somehow worth it. But if I had to pick just one moment from this title, one that spoke to me more than anything, but also one that justified this game's switch to a much darker tone and the completely different genre of survival horror, few moments in gaming, and hell, even storytelling, have ever stood out to me quite as much as the sequence in which newcomer to this series, Saga Anderson, finds herself in a trailer that the locals of Bright Falls claim used to be hers. The game up until this point had already begun foreshadowing what was inside Saga's supposed double-wide mobile home. A scene earlier in the game already kicked off the mystery that would come to define Saga's story in Alan Wake 2 after a chance encounter with the returning Rose Marigold ended in this surreal interaction.
Oh God. Saga! Saga Anderson. As I live and breathe. I thought we'd never see you back here after that awful, awful thing happened to your baby girl. How are you? I'm sorry. Who are you? I don't know what you're talking about. It's me, silly. Rose. You know me.
I don't think I do. And what horrible thing happened to my baby girl?
She drowned. Your daughter. That's so weird you don't remember.
How do you know I have a daughter?
But as hard as Saga tried to shake this weird moment off, things kept forcing this interaction back into focus. And after meeting the titular writer at the end of this game's prologue,
You got out of the dark place by writing a novel, the pages we've been finding. But your double edited it into a horror story that's now changing reality, taking over people, making them crazy, bringing the dark place to Bright Falls.
Yes, fiction coming in contact with the dark place can change reality. The story is coming true, soaking into everything like darkness when night falls.
and then even more bizarre interactions around the skeletal remains of the once thriving fishing and logging village of Wateree, Washington.
You own the trailer park, right? Mind if I take a look inside?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the owner of the Wateree Lighthouse Trailer Park, me, can help you with that. It's good to have our funniest resident back.
Resident? I don't understand what you mean.
If this is your way of getting out of any outstanding bills, don't worry. They've been handled. Must be hard coming back to where you and your little girl lived.
It's like they remember a different reality.
It was becoming pretty fucking clear by this point that the manuscript that Alan had written in his now seemingly successful attempt to finally escape the dark place was rapidly changing the surrounding area of Bright Falls and now Wateree to fit within the author's fiction, a manuscript with the title of Return. And somehow this shift in reality was invisible to just about everyone except for Saga. So here in this trailer, Saga makes her way around a home that she has no memory of ever living in. But between finding bills in her name, letters from mom, personal effects, this place certainly looks like she used to live here. And then as she explores a room that must have belonged to her daughter in this fictional home that was becoming more and more real by the moment, she sees it in black and white. A newspaper with the front page headline, Tragedy in Wateree, Local Girl Drowns, accompanied by the image of Saga's daughter Logan staring back at our protagonist. The date on the paper places this event 4 years in the past, but how could that be possible? Saga had just talked to Logan just a few hours prior on the phone.
How are you?
I'm good, Mom. How are you?
She was with her dad, right? Logan was back at her real home far away from Bright Falls. Saga rejects what she is looking at in this moment, rejects all of the weird occurrences that she had seen so far. She frantically calls Logan's phone, no answer. She tries her husband, answering machine. What the fuck is going on? But before she can even process everything, she sees a figure off in the distance wearing a deer mask. A cultist. One potentially responsible for the murders that brought her to Bright Falls and Watery in the first place. She has to give chase. And then much later in the game, as more and more events play out exactly as they were written in return, Saga is finally able to get a hold of her husband for the first time since this story started breaking her reality. But instead of finding relief, instead of hearing that Logan is still safe back at home, she hears this.
David, please pick up.
David,
David, it's me. Where have you...
stop. For once, you need to listen. You left me. You took my daughter away from me. Then you let her... She's dead because of you.
This plot beat in the trailer, and its continued ramp up, this moment has played out in my head constantly since I finished Alan Wake 2 back in December of last year. And even after replaying the first Alan Wake, American Nightmare, and Control for this now 4-part retrospective series that I've been working on, this sequence kept forcing itself into focus. For the events of Alan Wake and American Nightmare, with the point of view always focusing around the author, it was very easy to see his manuscript of departure and the earliest drafts of Return as means to an end. Alan was forced into this terrible situation by powers well outside of his understanding and comprehension. He was hijacked by the Dark Presence, it was holding his wife hostage, and he wasn't even fully conscious of what he was writing to help this evil entity come back into prominence. And then by the end of this 2010 adventure, Alan had sacrificed everything to trade Alice's imprisonment in the Dark Place for his own. But there were casualties left in the story's path as it crashed forward. Who were the Taken? They were real people before they were corrupted. We knew some of them by name, like Carl Stuckey, but who were all the others that Alan had mowed down on his path towards freeing Alice? American Nightmare has moments like this too, but it is framed within the confines of a TV show, but even there you could tell that Alan was definitely trying to save as many people as he could. But then there's Control. In Control's AWE DLC, we find out that Alan is more or less responsible for the invasion of the Hiss. Alan, in all of his countless attempts to free himself from the Dark Place, set into motion a sequence of events that led to an alien invasion, just so he could bring the Federal Bureau of Control into his story and influence their presence in the world. But this event took the lives of countless agents, including the previous director. Alan, in his attempt to free himself, had indirectly killed so many people, and played with people's lives like pieces on a chessboard. But in Alan Wake 2, in that trailer, this was the first time that we got to feel what it meant to be at the mercy of the author's machinations. Feel the terror of being placed in this predicament. Just the day before, Saga's reality was entirely different, but now here she was with a past that she didn't remember, a daughter who had been pulled into the story and potentially sacrificed as part of Saga's fictional backstory that would lead her back to Bright Falls. And that is a horrifying reality to think about, especially with Saga being fully aware of this shift in reality. Everything she knew was becoming a thing of the past. The details of her entire life were just evaporating around her and twisting into something new, with her being unable to so much as communicate that this was happening, because to just about everyone else around her who was unable to see the illusion, this was now simply the way that things had always been. For Saga, this is a worse fate than even something like a Thanos snap, because for her, this was something that only she could see, and unless she could figure out a way to stop it, she would forever have to live in this new world, where everything had just been taken away from her with a few arbitrary keystrokes of Alan's typewriter. And then, what about all the others? People with lives that were being reshaped without their knowledge. Completely different circumstances that had to just be accepted as fact. And I think that the reason that this moment and this hellish fate stuck with me so much was this was the first time where I could really see that Sam Lake and the rest of the team at Remedy were truly exploring the ramifications of the story that they were writing. Alan's power had consequences now, and we were being forced to deal with the writer in a new light. And because of this change in perspective, I could see how much this team had grown up. Remedy was no longer satisfied to just string together a plot that acted as an excuse to go from shootout to shootout. This was a group of storytellers reckoning with what they had created, and in that moment, the 13-year gap felt like a necessity. And with all the connections to the rest of Remedy's past work, I mean, there are Easter eggs and events that constantly bolster past, present, and future titles from the developer, connections that wouldn't have been possible if the Alan Wake prototype had become the proper sequel years ago. But again, Alan Wake 2 is a game of moments, and once this story started, Remedy never let their collective foot off the gas. So with all that said, outside of a string of outstanding moments, what is Alan Wake 2? Structurally, this new title from Remedy is a survival horror game in the vein of titles like RE2 Remake or Evil Within. That's when the game is not acting like a sort of True Detective themed walking simulator or like a surrealist metafiction roller coaster inspired by Remedy's development history. And then thematically, each of our two protagonists, their campaigns leverage different styles of survival horror to, on one hand, ground the action to some version of reality, while the other shows the steps taken to completely undermine that real-world aesthetic. Even though this is Alan Wake 2, this title uses Saga Anderson as its point-of-view character early on to onboard new players, and also acts as a primer to catch old fans back up to speed. Her campaign starts off straightforward enough. An FBI agent with her partner, Alex Casey, but more on him later, are dispatched to Bright Falls after the most recent murder victim in a string of bizarre killings and disappearances turns up. But before either Saga or Alan's campaign starts, the first playable section of this game places us in the perspective of the most recent murder victim, Agent Nightingale from the first game. And while that sequence in the trailer with Saga might be the most horrifying moment on a psychological level, this opening sequence shows us the much grittier and more visceral tone that Alan Wake 2 is going for when compared to the first game in the series. Just upon booting up Alan Wake 2, live-action cutscenes bleed seamlessly into computer-generated graphics, and the opening sequence takes the player on a horrifying ride. As the agent emerges from the depths of Cauldron Lake and washes upon its shore completely naked at dusk, the bleak atmosphere just starts layering on from here. The water, the foliage, Nightingale's glistening man-ass, and shining back hair, everything here is rendered to an almost preposterous level of detail. And as the player is forced to push the sequence forward, the illusion of this naked and afraid scenario continues to ramp up. Droning synths, snapping twigs, Nightingale grunting as he tries to find his footing and catch his breath between stumbling through the mud and brush, all while the whistling wind cuts through the tree line. This is a masterclass in setting tone. And then there are stylized live-action jump scares that intrude upon the gameplay for just long enough to disorient the player, keeping this tone consistently in the fucked up and uncomfortable. And the way that this sequence ends, with Nightingale closing in on signs of civilization just to be captured, shot, and stabbed by masked lunatics referring to themselves as the cult of the tree before being tied down and having his heart removed from his chest, Alan Wake 2 quickly establishes that this horror story is nothing like the horror-themed action game that we played back in 2010. And as Nightingale's butchered body is laid bare on a picnic table, two civilians stumble across the scene and are chased off by the cult, as the camera follows them and returns to Cauldron Lake for arguably one of the better title cards that I've ever seen in a video game. Saga arrives the next day to investigate this murder, but we quickly learn that our first playable protagonist is exceptionally gifted when it comes to performing investigations. When playing as Saga, just about everything she picks up in the environment functions as something of a clue in her ongoing investigation. But putting these clues to use plays into a bit of character building in which Saga, with the press of a button, can instantly switch over from wherever she is in this game's world to a representation of the inner workings of her deductive reasoning, a metaphorical idea made physical, a room she calls her mind place. Switching back and forth between these environments is seamless with no load times whatsoever, and from a technical level it is fairly impressive, even though it is nothing compared to some of the stuff that is done in Alan's chapters. But how this is implemented into gameplay is a little less exciting than its technical execution. Find a clue, phase over to the mind place, which acts as a stylized menu of sorts, snap between your options here like upgrading weapons or listening to found media, and then shift over to the case board, and then snap your new clue on the board in the one place that it can fit. Even if you are not seeing its direct connections to the case at hand, you can always brute force this case board as each clue has a designated spot, and doing this usually results in Saga gaining further understanding and insight of the crime around her. But in some of these situations, she gets premonitions of sorts that allow for her to profile certain suspects and make leaps in logic that would otherwise be impossible for a normal detective. And this mechanic functions very well from a storytelling perspective, keeping the player engaged in even the minutia of Saga's investigation. But from a gameplay perspective, this is an aspect that feels a little too on rails for my liking. And if I were to try and armchair design my way out of this one, I would make it at least parallel something like the Ace Attorney series, where prompts would make you have to consider the context of the evidence just a little more directly.
Hold it!
But with that being said, there is a real sort of satisfaction to placing these pieces on the board and reading their little blurbs, as it constantly kept me engaged with the unfolding narrative. Here at Cauldron Lake, Saga, through the use of her mind plays technique, is able to figure out Nightingale's identity, several strange aspects surrounding his death, but ultimately the path that he took out of the lake and towards his untimely demise. And tracing his footsteps back from where he came leads Saga to her first big discovery in this case. Nestled in the trunk of a giant tree in Cauldron Lake's surrounding forest, coincidentally where Nightingale's trail comes to a dead stop, is a piece of paper from a manuscript written by Alan Wake, with this particular page detailing Saga and Casey's arrival and the early nature of their case, with this particular story taking on Saga as the main character in a novel called Return. This is the structure for Saga's campaign. Follow the clues, try to solve the crime, but as she does, she gets pulled deeper and deeper into Wake's narrative, ultimately leading us back to that scene in the trailer where the stakes couldn't be higher. As for the author's half of the game in Alan Wake 2, his chapters are known as Initiation, and this campaign details Alan's most recent attempts to get out of the dark place, even though it does seem like there may have been long stretches during his imprisonment where the author had given up on writing his way out. As one could imagine, over the course of these 13 years, Alan has tried just about everything to free himself. From the events of the first game's DLC, The Signal and the Writer, to the events of American Nightmare, and arguably even into the events of Quantum Break. But as for right now, those connections seem to be nothing more than an Easter egg, even though their inclusion seems to be more and more likely with each passing day. And then there are the events of Control, in which the author more or less sent an army of extra-dimensional aliens to the Federal Bureau's doorstep in 2019's title. And those are just the attempts that we have seen. Who knows what the writer has been up to in his decade-plus confinement, with even his recent inclusions in Fortnite and Dead by Daylight being considered canon attempts for the writer's escape by the team at Remedy. But here in Alan Wake 2, these seem to be the most important attempts. As whether conscious or not, Alan, having written Saga into the plot beats of Return, set a series of events into motion, with each of his dives into the dark place paralleling her journey. A sequence in which Alan and Saga meet in a void between realities before she finds him unceremoniously freed from the dark place washed upon the shore of Cauldron Lake. An incredible looking moment as Saga explores the woods around Bright Falls and her reality begins to bleed into a subway station from a different realm. Both these sequences parallel a part of Alan's journey into the fictional version of New York, recreated by the Dark Presence's power in an attempt to keep him locked within its labyrinthine design. This is effectively the structure of the game going forward. Alan barreling towards his eventual escape from the dark place, and how through paralleling the story that he wrote for Saga, the two ended up becoming integral parts of the new manuscripts he had written. But with time being almost meaningless in the dark place, and with its power over fiction being bent on breaking Alan's mind, his chapters are considerably more dreamlike and surreal than anything that occurs in Saga's chapters. If Saga's chapters are grounded in reality in the beginning and eventually lean into the supernatural like a Stephen King novel, Alan's chapters go completely off the rails in a way that completely betrays Alan Wake 2's Twin Peaks and more specifically Black Lodge inspirations. In the dark place, nothing is what it seems. Alan originally finds himself on the set of a late-night talk show with the mysterious Mr. Door, played by the absolutely incredible David Harwood, a charming figure who seems to be operating at some scale independently from the rest of the dark place and its machinations, but seemingly placed here in some small way by Alan's writings. And with Mr. Door being a clever little workaround for the name Hatch, and with Harwood essentially spelling out the idea that he landed the role of Door after the untimely death of another actor, it seems all but confirmed that this character is simultaneously a stand-in and something of an alternate reality version of Martin Hatch from Quantum Break, with Harwood clearly filling the shoes of the late great Lance Reddick. And just pausing here for a bit, these scenes, these fully live-action sequences are absolutely beautiful. Not only is the transition from gameplay into them some next level shit, But the way these are shot, acted, and even small things like the seamless dubbing of Matthew Paretta's voice work against Ika Villi's physical acting, this whole production is a complete step up from what we saw in Quantum Break. Where that last production felt like something out of basic cable TV, these sequences and later scenes play out like something from a feature film, showcasing Remedy's and Sam Lake's talents on a level which makes it clear that Remedy is the best to ever do this kind of thing. The way that this game constantly plays with live action superimposed over this title's already rock solid visuals, if there was an opportunity for this to look out of place or goofy, Remedy danced over every single one of those tripwires and delivered something that looks truly unlike anything else. But when it comes to the actual structure of Alan's chapters, dream logic takes over. Hallways that loop and staircases that travel upward just to dump Alan below from where he started. This approximation of New York City where Alan lived with Alice is a twisted trap, all under the influence of an insidious looping timeline designed to torment and trap the writer while the dark presence gains its power, using Alan's writing to try and manifest itself once again in Bright Falls. And this place's beef with Alan, it's clear. Graffiti on the walls of this fictional New York taunt the writer, telling him to give up. And with Remedy's attention to detail, basically hiring several graffiti artists to make all this stuff feel cohesive, it looks incredible. And they all convey messages that could have been written by Alan himself or the Dark Presence, making it so that Alan can barely trust his own mind. But it's not just the setting that is hostile. Shadow people fixate on Alan, with the writer being uncertain when he is being threatened or just being toyed with. Everything here in this cosmic ocean at the bottom of the lake is designed specifically to destroy Alan's mind. Plot-wise, Alan's chapters are being manufactured around him by Thomas Zane, himself, and even a fictional version of Alex Casey, the protagonist of Alan's crime novels before he got himself stuck in this realm. But with James McCaffrey, rest in peace, and Sam Lake coming together to play this character and some very specific wardrobe choices, this character ends up taking on a role that is eerily similar to Max Payne from Remedy's past. And the connections don't stop there. And in fact, they just keep getting wilder and wilder. For example, here in The Dark Place, we effectively meet Max Payne. Actor Sean Ashmore, who we originally met during Saga's campaign, takes on the role of Tim Breaker, in a not-so-subtle nod to Quantum Break, with this character being a local sheriff and cousin to Sarah Breaker from the first game, who was suddenly transported to the Dark Place in a flash by someone who looks suspiciously like the late-night talk show host that Alan repeatedly finds himself being interviewed by.
No, wait.
Alan meets this sheriff here during his travels through the twisting environments, and Tim aids him on his journey by helping him map out the changing landscape. And even the game Control gets several nods, with none more important than meeting Ati, the janitor in the TV studio. There are also some small mentions of Dr. Darling, and even a brief glimpse at Jesse Faden, but as fun as all of that is, nothing in this Dark Place is more confusing than the whole Alex Casey thing. When Alan finds himself sitting on the set of Mr. Door's show, he is sitting next to an actor named Sam Lake, there to promote his upcoming film in which he is playing Alex Casey. And believe me, this shit gets more and more insane, as this is not Sam Lake, the video game director. This is a completely different character, one who originally showed up in Alan Wake's first outing, but there it just felt like a fun little Easter egg. But here Remedy has a lot more fun with it.
Get all you with the wrong guy. I'm not Alex Casey. I only play him in the movies. He's just a fictional character.
What's going on here?
Outside of the TV studio, Alan meets who he initially believes is the same actor that he was just sitting next to. But in this rundown alley, he actually comes face to face with Alex Casey, the character that he wrote over a decade before. The Alex Casey who is partnered up with Saga out in the real world has no relation to this man, even though he looks and speaks the exact same way that this character does. And in fact, this real Alex Casey out in the real world, if that's even a thing at all, he finds this whole coincidence mildly annoying. But here in The Dark Place, Detective Alex Casey's real-life case tracking down a cult in New York City acts as the impetus for the action in Alan's sequences, as Alan has to visit different murder scenes in his attempt to get out of the Dark Place once and for all. But the Alex Casey here is effectively Max Payne, and then Sam Lake is there, and then there is even a fully produced short film in this game that is completely optional and even completely missable, in which the real-world Sam Lake plays a Finnish actor named Alexei Kesa, who is more or less the same actor version of Sam Lake, but he could be a completely different person, and in this film written and directed by Thomas Zane, the man who we used to know as the poet and the diver, he himself plays a character named Alan Wake, and Zane is portrayed by Ika Billy, but now he's voiced by himself, and Jesus Christ, this whole thing makes my head hurt. Sam Lake managed to put himself in this game as like no fewer than 3 characters, and that's quite a feat. I mean, Sam Lake is either a genius or just a fucking hack, but either way, I'm fully locked in. Luckily, the actual structure of both Saga and Alan's chapters are fairly similar and straightforward when it comes to actually playing this game. With Saga, you walk around for long stretches of time gathering evidence, talking to other characters, and doing the whole investigation thing, with these stretches of downtime being most easily compared to a more narrative-focused game like Life is Strange. But as she makes progress into her investigation, she is always forced back out into the wooded area around Bright Falls at night, in full-on survival horror sections. With Alan, things are a little bit more on rails, effectively playing like a narrative-focused action game at its best moments similar to something like Quantum Break, and at its worst, playing similar to something like The Order 1886, as you slog through beautifully rendered environments, hugging the walls, looking for every usable item and plot-relevant clue. But whenever he is actively pursuing his way out of the dark place, things become twisted and horrifying as Alan makes his way through a more cerebral version of the genre in which enemies aren't always what they seem, and the incredible sound design usually does more to scare the player than anything else. Both characters have their share of downtime in Alan Wake 2, and while this may kind of sound like a complaint, it really isn't, at least not from my perspective, as these sections of gameplay lend themselves to world building and further characterization, making things like radio shows or even local television ads, things that you actually want to find in these environments. And in a few key cases, some of these are actual standouts.
And that's why, at Coscola Brothers Adventure Tours, we say, fuck the government. We have bolt cutters.
But when you are in the action stretches of gameplay with either character, things play like Alan Wake's original outing, filtered through Resident Evil 4, or more accurately, RE2 Remake. Claustrophobic over-the-shoulder camera? Check. A fully usable map that details pickups and locked doors? Check. Shambling enemies that throw shit at you from a distance and beat you up when they get close, which you have to essentially mag dump to take down? Those are here too. In fact, this was one of my major concerns when I first saw gameplay footage of Alan Wake 2, as try as I might, I've never been able to fully enjoy the traditional survival horror genre. Me personally, I don't really like games in which I am being limited by scarce item placement and clunky mechanics as a way to build dread. In fact, the main reason I liked the original Alan Wake as much as I did was found in the fact that it was a horror-adjacent story in which I could actually engage with the action mechanics at a steady clip. But Alan Wake 2 was able to get me to cooperate with this direction. One, all of the Alan Wake trappings are here that you'd expect. Flashlights that burn away the darkness, hand flares and flashbangs still act as your personal explosive ordnance, and both characters can still do that weird dodge that Alan introduced back in 2010, this time without the bullshit slowdown cinematics. If you are a survival horror fan, if you like limited items and munitions, I think that this is an excellent version of that. Weapons are varied and sound incredible to use, all of which can be augmented through the use of an easy-to-use upgrade system, even if how it's implemented is a little goofy in practice, with Alan essentially writing superhuman weapon handling techniques into reality.
Saga realized the crossbow could hold 2 shots at the same time. Had she just not noticed before? Or had the weapon changed somehow? Like in a dream.
But, I mean, it's about damn time that the writer actually did something useful. And the enemy design, while it uses mostly fairly straightforward retreads of ideas that we've seen in previous Alan Wake games, there are a few unique types here and there, and a few spooky but albeit frustrating bosses to fight. But no enemy type in this game is more frustrating than those damned wolves which stalk Saga through the woods at night. They prowl, with you often hearing them long before you see them, but they move so fast and always in a very realistic way where they seldom attack you head on, but hell, actually hitting these things is a chore. Between the over-the-shoulder tight camera work and a more deliberate control scheme, these things never quite lend themselves to fighting these beasts particularly well. But outside of that major complaint, the action gameplay here is solid. And even when it does feel a little clunky at times, it is usually in a way that is representative of the genre that Alan Wake 2 is trying to be a part of. So it's really going to come down to taste and how much you can vibe with these mechanics. But for the rest of the survival horror package, you know, the puzzle solving stuff, find the rooster-shaped MacGuffin to unlock the rooster door type stuff. I feel that Alan Wake does this arguably better than any other survival horror game that I've ever played. With Saga, it always revolves around the mind place. Find clues, and she will use her deduction to lead you through the puzzles, with some of them being decent little head scratchers, and with some optional puzzles centered around some multi-stepped algebra problems. I actually had to break out the scratch paper to solve some of these. But with Alan, things get way more fun and experimental. Alan, similar to Saga, he too has his own little oasis that is just one button press away. Instead of the mind place, it is the writer's room. But when compared to Saga's private world, his is definitely less cozy, functioning more like a physical representation of a menu screen. But with Alan's writing ability, he will sometimes find clues that allow for him to completely rewrite the context of a given location. An empty ballroom in an already run-down hotel might be a spooky place in one light, but what happens when you make it the site of a cultist ritual?
The scene had changed.
Wait.
This instant switching of environments, especially when coupled with an item known simply as the Angel Lamp, basically the lamp which the clicker was originally cut from in the first Alan Wake game, these mechanics allow Alan to completely morph environments around him at will with virtually no loading times, in a way that just kind of feels like digital sorcery. In fact, this is the first time since that one Titanfall 2 level in which you can go back and forth through time at will, that I have been this impressed by a video game mechanic. It is seriously Portal and Portal 2 levels of creative design, and it is the kind of stuff that could only be this truly impactful in the medium of video games. And because of stuff like that, that's ultimately where I ended up with Alan Wake 2. It's a solid survival horror game, and even a solid walking simulator when it wants to be. The action is exactly where it needs to be to keep this game satisfying. But it is really in these moments in which the game is being fully experimental with its design choices, art direction, and storytelling where I couldn't pull myself away from this experience. The story itself is always twisting, but because of the way it's being told, and its greater standing within the bigger picture of Remedy, I found myself becoming obsessed with catching every little detail, trying to piece together the grander narrative. But when I ultimately found myself researching Norse mythology to factor in some of the more esoteric shit going on, I felt like it was time to pack it in. The characters in this game are great, even if they are a little weird. Saga is a quirky detective with a penchant for telling bad jokes.
Hey, Casey. What's the far's favorite shape?
Please, Anderson. Just one case without the
A triangle.
I don't get it.
Yes, you do.
But she is also the proper hero of this story, and Melanie LeBird's voice acting is great throughout. But this character is also pretty fucking weird. Sure, she has the whole mind place thing going on, and sure, her life is turned upside down and inside out by the conclusion of this game, but some of her quirks, I mean, first, she is coded similarly to Jesse Faden from Control.
You know what? I'm happy. Happy to be here.
And by that, I mean she is just a little too comfortable with all the strange shit going on.
Someone's been watching us.
Playing a sick game with us.
You were right. This is right up my alley.
Luckily, by the time her daughter's life is at stake, she gets it together. But similar to the director of the FBC, she is just a little too cheery when dealing with all this shit. She also has a weird fascination with taxidermied deer heads, and one sequence in which she was performing a medical examination on the recently deceased Agent Nightingale. I mean, what are you doing? Alan's characterization in this story is interesting throughout. He is in some ways the same self-serious version of himself from American Nightmare, and decidedly way less douchey than he was in the first game. But after 13 years of being trapped in the dark place, he is definitely hard to relate to on the same level that I did in his original 2 outings. He is still likable because of this game's writing and the 2 actors bringing him to life, but between the increasing toll his writing has been taking on the world and his ineptitude as an author at several moments in this story, he comes across as more of an incompetent demigod at times than the flawed everyman that we got in the original outing. I still like him, but yeah, Alan's weird. And then the whole Alex Casey thing is a nightmare. But Sam Lake and McCaffrey keep all of the versions of this character entertaining throughout. Rose is more insane than she's ever been in this series, with it being revealed that she's been out in the woods killing Taken, that is when she's not working as an assisted living nurse or waitress at the Oh Dear Diner, and even small characters which only existed in the background like the duo of Deputy Sheriff Mulligan and Thornton, characters that we never actually met in the first game. Instead, we just got to hear them bumble on over the police radio from time to time, always doing their best Keystone Cop impersonations.
Now, is it just me, or does Deerfest get wilder every year? People seem to be more drunk, at least, or they start earlier, And younger.
Oh, it's definitely not just you, Pat, but... Definitely, Pat. Hey, I'm talking here, Thornton. Oh, shoot, I lost my train of thought.
But yeah, these guys are back, and they are still incompetent as always.
What do you mean? The sheriff disappeared? Like poof? He's gone like magic? Magic's not real. Magic's not real. Right? Mulligan?
No, Thornton. Monsters aren't real, and magic's definitely not real.
I knew that.
I mean, these guys are truly the Chief Wiggum and Huckleberry Hound for the greater Bright Falls area.
Oh my God, it just disappeared! It's a ghost car!
But they are insanely weird, but I'll circle back to that in a second. I think when it comes down to characters that are genuine standouts for this title, you have the charismatic Mr. Door, who absolutely steals every scene that he's in, and then the softer and more sentimental versions of the old gods of Asgard, as their connection with Saga really changes up their dynamic. But I think the single most impactful character this time around is found in Alice Wake, a character that was not much of a character at all in the first game. Here in Alan Wake 2, after Alan finds himself in the Dark Places version of his old apartment, he finds handycam footage shot by Alice in a confessional style. In these clips, she outlines her experience. She talks about how she is being tormented by who she believes is Alan, but in reality, it is Alan's evil doppelganger from the first game, Mr. Scratch. And she talks about coming to terms with the loss of her husband. And with some late game reveals, we learn how incredibly brave this character has been behind the scenes, with implications that could change the entirety of how we view certain events in this series. But I'm not really interested in spoiling any of those connections at this moment. Honestly, I could gush about this game for hours at a time, and yet I never feel like I'm fully capable of breaking down how everything works so well. The game is great, the game is fun to play, even if it's not the type of genre that I typically fuck with, and it's insanely stylish. And then with its connections with Control, all coming to a head when the FBC inevitably shows up in Bright Falls, I thoroughly enjoyed seeing this horror story being broken down as yet another AWE for that team of agents. And the way that they used completely different terminology from the people actually living it, I love that cold type of othering that they brought to the situation. Alan Wake 2 is not a perfect game, but it might be a perfect sequel, especially considering how long of a wait it's been. I really don't have many complaints, but if I had to throw them out just for a bit of fair criticism, they would be pretty small nitpicks. First, the game is a little slow to start during certain chapters. And while I didn't mind this at all during my first playthrough, as I was always looking for every little extra bit of supplementary material, but my second run through the game with the Final Draft DLC, which was added as a new game plus with a few extra bits of lore sprinkled through, that playthrough felt like more of a slog when it came to this game's slower pacing. Enemies and bosses were a little too bullet spongy for me at times, and this makes it so that your resources deplete very quickly. But the game makes up for this by having procedurally generated supply crates that always seem to house exactly what you needed at any moment. But with that being the case, can't we just make the enemies less defensive? I get the illusion of being outgunned is important in a game like this, but sometimes it really just felt artificial. And then the balancing is a little out of whack, as playing the game on normal means these enemies will just soak up full clips, but switching the game over to story mode means that they go down entirely too fast, making it not a challenge at all, and kind of not fun. But again, this is a nitpick. The game can also be a little on rails at times, with the storytelling always being the driving force in this title, and because of that, it does make this game just a little less fun to replay. Alan Wake 2 is a story where every twist and turn comes as a surprise, and certain moments just catch you off guard. But running through some of these sequences again, they kind of failed to have quite the same impact on a second playthrough. And when I compare this experience to the multiple run-throughs I've done with Control, Alan Wake 2 does feel more in line with something like Quantum Break, even if it is doing similar things at a much more competent level this time around. And by that I mean that this story is very contained with rising and falling action that is functionally designed like a roller coaster. But considering that this game is co-directed by Sam Lake and Kyle Rowley, lead designer of Quantum Break, that is hardly a surprise. Your best experience with this game and its narrative is going to be your first one, for sure. But it is a hell of a ride, one which I'm glad I took, and I was always constantly surprised to see what would happen next. And then for a really weird final complaint, there are two really weird bits of writing that stood out to me, but they kind of require further analysis. There are two scenes in this game, and I'll just let the footage rock.
The story. My life, my family is just part of a book. Another white asshole deciding what I get to do, how I get to do it. He took my daughter from me.
And then there is another bit with the police officers Mulligan and Thornton as written by Alan Wake.
Thornton turned to his partner. These government motherfuckers. Next time, Mulligan, I'll tell her. You got no clue. You let your own kid drown. You're a fucking fraud. Mulligan leered. Pinning the murder on the Bookers would have fixed this whole goddamn mess. But their kind always sticks together. I reckon we should show the bitch who's boss, Thornton.
Obviously, these two lines of dialogue are going to offend certain sensitive types. And this kind of dialogue and Saga being a black woman altogether, if you read what certain weirdos on the internet have to say, are both being attributed to a recent controversy that has been spreading its neo-Gamergate energy throughout certain message boards. Alan Wake 2, like Spider-Man 2, and God of War Ragnarok are all games that have been made alongside the consultant group Sweet Baby Inc., a company that, according to their own website, is an inclusion-focused narrative and consultation company. This consultant group has been brought on board to multiple projects to make sure that issues around representation are handled well, and to make sure that players from different backgrounds feel like their own groups are being shown in a positive light. In the case of Alan Wake 2, the company worked on, and again this is according to their own website, character arcs, voice, and sensitivity reading. Certain gamers have been upset about what they perceive as forced diversity, and in some cases what they see as an attack on established franchises by a more woke ideology. And just in the comments of my own video on Spider-Man 2, I saw a few gamers outraged at that game's handling of Peter Parker, as the franchise seems to be making efforts to move Miles Morales more into the limelight as the more modern Spider-Man. As a result, gamers have concluded that this consulting group must be to blame for the changing tone and representation in their medium of choice. And through harassment campaigns and digging up old tweets, these gamers have found people from within the group who have less than savory opinions, specifically about white male gamers. So, it's a lock, right? This company with these opinions must be responsible for this kind of writing. And they must be the reason behind Saga Anderson suddenly becoming a person of color when she was originally portrayed by a white actress back in the Quantum Break concept teaser. I mean, right? Well, not if we are to believe Kyle Rowley, you know, the co-director of this fucking game. A lot of time has passed between Quantum Break and Alan Wake 2. And with Quantum Break being a Microsoft property, it was clear that they were just throwing that little sequence into the game as an Easter egg for fans. And things change with time. But this little teaser is more than enough evidence for some unhinged gamers to cry foul about race swapping. I mean, go figure. I think what bothers me about this whole controversy is people don't seem to know how consulting firms work. And they don't seem to be capable of identifying why these consulting firms are here in the first place. You don't hire a consultant and then they just get to dictate how you utilize their expertise. You hire them, they show you how you can take what you already have and how you could change it to get the results that you want. Remedy brought Sweet Baby Inc. on board. Whether it was because of publisher pressure or their own decision, we will never know. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter why they were brought on. Whatever they ended up contributing, because we will never know who wrote what lines of dialogue, ultimately it is up to Lake, Rowley, and the rest of the team at Remedy to decide first whether or not they wanted to use a consultant's advice, and then it is up to the team to decide how they are going to implement that advice if they decided that they were going to use it in the first place. So back to those lines of dialogue. They did stick out to me. Not because I was afraid that Alan Wake had suddenly become Alan Woke, but more because they just showed up without any real context. Alan wrote Saga's daughter into his horror story. The insult of white asshole seems pretty fair to me, but she did use the term another. This is where I have a little bit of grief with this line. Sure, being a black agent in America, I'm sure a character like Saga would have encountered no shortage of weirdness while she came up the ranks. But whether or not she had ever dealt with that kind of stuff is never shown in this game. This is a tell, don't show approach. And as a result, this line just kind of pops up out of nowhere. From a writing perspective, it would have just taken one single interaction anywhere else in the game with a white supervisor or even just some redneck in the woods to establish that Saga had dealt with some bullshit in the past. But it's just not there. In fact, all the characters around Saga seem to like her. Her partner views her as an incredible detective and never shows her anything but respect and friendship, and all the surrounding cast seems to welcome her back into this community that she never lived in until the story changed reality. And then the line about the cops. Again, racist cops exist, it's a real thing. But these cops, they were only ever used as comedic relief in the past. just bumbling doofuses. But now they've been secretly racist this whole time. It just felt off. Like trying to turn Chief Wiggum into Derek Chauvin during the next season of The Simpsons. Again, we don't know who wrote these words, but we do know whose call it was to implement them in the way that they were. And that falls on Sam Lake, Rowley, and the rest of the writing staff. If the consultants wrote these lines, it falls on Remedy to make sure that they fit the broader narrative, and that these themes were reinforced. And if this was something written by the staff at Remedy in the first place, again, it was their job to make sure that these themes were supported. I personally don't care about these words. In fact, I'm kinda down with their inclusion to a certain extent. It just came as a surprise when considering the rest of what is written in this game. The attention to detail on every little character, bit of environmental storytelling, and supplementary text tying events from multiple games and even universes together is nothing short of incredible. And then just messing up a common show don't tell trope, these lines stuck out. And then there is the matter of why these consultant groups exist in the first place. If you ask the forum dwellers, it is simply because of some woke ideology. But that is definitely missing the point. And the point is money. With these companies growing in scale, and most importantly the cost of development, these games need to sell as many copies as they can, and to as many people as they can, regardless of whatever demographic they represent. And with more people from all sorts of backgrounds enjoying the medium of video games than ever before, these consultant firms have stepped up to provide a service. And whether or not they are great at providing that service, or even qualified to help creatives rewrite their work, that is besides the point. The corporations want to reach as many people as possible, and if they believe that these services will help or save them from potential alienation, they are going to use these services. Sorry about the rant. I have just been hearing a lot of people calling this game like overly progressive, and really those were the only two lines of dialogue that kind of stood out that way to me, and I just want to give my take on it, even though I think they kind of fumbled the writing in those cases. But in no way do those things, or any of the nitpicks I've outlined, or even the surrounding controversy, change my enjoyment of Alan Wake 2. This game was 100% my personal game of the year for 2023, with last year being a particularly strong year in video games. And honestly, I eagerly await the follow-up DLC chapters that are around the bend, and I cannot wait for Control 2 more than just about any other game on the horizon. Long live Remedy, long live Alan Wake. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. It is always greatly appreciated. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider dropping a like, comment, or even subscribing to the channel, as all of that helps immensely. This ends my 4-part series on all things Alan Wake. And really, as much as I love this series, I am ready to move on to something different. I've been thinking about Alan Wake for just about every day since Alan Wake 2 was released. And yeah, this series took a while to hammer out. My next video will be part 5 of my Ranking Every Video Game Ever Made series. And for that episode, I will be figuring out how games like Spider-Man 2, Alan Wake American Nightmare, Control, and now Alan Wake 2 stack up against the rest of the titles that I've played on this channel. So I hope to see you in the next video, but until then, thank you for watching. You're all beautiful people, and I hope you have a great day.